The pack came for blood, found Pups sleeping on an Omega as the Alpha King shows mercy. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main characters. Sarah Whitlock had always known she was different, but she never could have imagined just how much her life was about to change. In the small, shadowed corners of the pack, where whispers about her lack of scent and power circulated, she was nothing more than a discarded Omega. With every passing year, her hope of finding a mate, or even being valued, slipped further and further away. The other wolves avoided her, and the cruel remarks from pack members had become her only company. It was the night of the annual ritual, the most important night for every Omega, when the Alpha King would come to select his mate among the gathered females. Sarah had never thought she stood a chance. As the other Omegas were eagerly chosen, their scent strong and alluring, Sarah stood at the back, her heart sinking lower with every passing moment. She had never been called upon, never seen as worthy. The ritual was ending, and Sarah stood there in silence, feeling the sting of rejection wash over her. But just as she was about to leave, her mind clouded with despair, something happened. The massive wooden doors of the hall swung open with a powerful thud. A presence filled the room, and all eyes turned in stunned silence. He entered, tall, commanding, and as terrifying as the legends described, the Alpha King, Kale Thornridge. His silver eyes scanned the room with the authority of a ruler, yet something in his gaze softened when it landed on Sarah. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as their eyes met. He was not like the other alphas, his presence was something altogether different. It was as though the world had paused just for them. The tension in the air thickened, and for the first time in her life, Sarah felt a sense of belonging, a sense of being seen, but not for the reasons she had imagined. Kale Thornridge, the Alpha King, stood at the front, and the entire room fell silent. He raised his hand, a gesture that commanded attention. "Sarah Whitlock," he said, his voice like a soft but powerful rumble that sent a shiver down her spine. "You are mine." The words reverberated through the hall. The room, filled with so many powerful wolves, remained frozen in shock. Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. The Alpha King had chosen her an Omega, one who had always been overlooked, one who had been nothing more than a shadow among the pack. But now, she was being chosen in front of everyone. She stepped forward, uncertain of her next move, her heart racing in her chest. The murmurs from the crowd started up again, but this time, it wasn't with mockery. There was awe, there was respect, and there was something else, hope. Kale's gaze softened as he watched her, and for the first time, Sarah saw something in him that wasn't just power. It was a deep, quiet understanding, as if he had always known she was the one he had been searching for. She took a step toward him, and the moment their eyes locked again, Sarah knew this was no mistake. This was fate. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she slowly stepped forward, her feet moving almost of their own accord. The room was still, all eyes on her. Every Alpha, Beta, and Omega in the hall seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for the Alpha King to make his next move. But Kale Thornridge remained motionless, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel as though she were the only one in the room. His silver eyes, so sharp and clear, seemed to pierce through her, seeing past her insecurities, past the layers of fear and self-doubt she had carried for years. Sarah couldn't comprehend what was happening. She had spent her life in the shadows, always overlooked, always discarded. And yet here she was, standing before the most powerful Alpha in the land, chosen by him. The thought alone was enough to make her legs tremble. Kale's voice broke the silence once more, his tone firm yet surprisingly gentle. "You are my Luna," he declared, his words sending ripples through the crowd. Sarah felt a mix of emotions surge through her, confusion, disbelief, and a strange sense of warmth she had never known before. The Alpha King had spoken, and with those words, the fate she had always dreamed of, yet never dared hope for, was now a reality. As Sarah stood there, still processing the enormity of the situation, Kale took a step toward her. His presence filled the space, and his power seemed to radiate from him, yet there was something about the way he looked at her that softened the intensity of his aura. He was not the ruthless ruler that the stories had portrayed. No, he was something else, something deeper, more complex. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions and thoughts. She had been a nobody, an Omega who had never been chosen, never been seen. And now, the Alpha King had chosen her, not out of duty, not out of obligation, but because, in his eyes, she was worthy. "You belong with me," Kale said, his voice a low murmur, but his words were filled with undeniable conviction. Sarah looked up at him, her throat dry, her heart hammering. She had always been told she wasn't enough, never strong enough, never beautiful enough. But here, in this moment, in front of everyone, Kale Thornridge was telling her she was enough. She was more than enough. The silence in the room grew heavy as Kale reached out, his hand steady and sure. Without thinking, Sarah placed her hand in his, the contact sending a jolt of warmth through her body. It was as if the very act of touching him, of accepting his claim, awakened something inside her, something she didn't fully understand yet, but something powerful and real. As they stood there, the crowd around them seemed to disappear. It was just Sarah and Kale now, bound together by a force neither of them could deny. The weight of the moment hung in the air, but it wasn't a burden. It was a promise that Sarah had never imagined she would receive. And yet, here she was, the Omega who had been abandoned by her pack, now standing at the side of the Alpha King, her mate, her protector. Kale led her through the hall, his hand never leaving hers, and with every step they took, Sarah felt herself growing stronger. The murmurs from the crowd slowly faded into the background, their judgment no longer a threat. In that moment, she realized that the Alpha King's mercy wasn't just about saving her from the pack's rejection, it was about offering her a new life, a life where she could finally be seen, not as a broken Omega, but as a woman worthy of love and respect. As they left the hall, Sarah looked up at Kale, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and awe. For the first time in her life, she felt like she truly belonged. And this was just the beginning. As Sarah walked beside Kale, the Alpha King, her mind was spinning with the overwhelming reality of everything that had just unfolded. She had always dreamed of a moment like this, though she never thought it would come to her in such a way. Her hand remained firmly clasped in his, a connection that felt both foreign and deeply familiar at the same time. They walked through the corridors of the castle, their footsteps echoing off the ancient stone walls. The grandeur of the palace seemed to fade into the background as Kale led her to a quieter, more private part of the castle. It was there, in the solitude of his chambers, that the weight of the evening's events began to settle in. Kale stopped in front of a large window, his back turned to Sarah. He gazed out over the kingdom, his expression unreadable. Sarah stood a few feet behind him, unsure of what to say. Her heart still raced in her chest, and her thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and curiosity. She had never imagined herself in this position, standing next to the Alpha King, claimed as his mate, and now here she was, in his world, his home. "You're still processing, aren't you?" Kale's voice broke the silence, soft yet commanding. Sarah hesitated before replying, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to think, Kale. This is all so much." Kale turned to face her, his silver eyes softening. "I know," he said gently. "I never expected it to happen like this either. But it is what it is, Sarah. You and I were meant to find each other. And now that we have, there's no turning back." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat as she absorbed his words. She had always believed in fate, in the idea that there was someone out there for everyone, but she never imagined that person would be someone like Kale Thornridge, the powerful, distant Alpha King. She had seen him from afar, heard the stories, the whispers about his strength and his curse, but she never thought she would be the one to be by his side. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm not like the others. I'm not strong, I'm not anything special." Kale's expression hardened slightly, as if her words had struck a nerve. He stepped closer to her, his presence filling the room. "You are everything to me, Sarah. Don't ever doubt that. Your strength is in your heart, in your kindness, in your ability to see the world in a way that no one else can. That's why I chose you. And that's why you'll be my Luna. The words felt like a promise, a vow that tied them together in a way Sarah couldn't fully understand. But she believed in him, even though everything about this new life felt so foreign. Kale reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands. You're safe now, Sarah. You'll never have to hide again. His touch was warm, reassuring, and for the first time in her life, Sarah felt truly seen. She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, allowing herself to feel the safety and comfort that he offered. It was a feeling she had never known before, and it made her heart swell with emotion. I'm not used to this, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Used to what? Kale asked, his voice low and filled with curiosity. Being cared for, Sarah replied softly. I've spent my whole life being invisible, being told I'm not enough. But you see me. And that scares me. Kale smiled, the warmth in his gaze never faltering. You don't have to be afraid anymore, Sarah. I'll always see you. Always protect you. He leaned in closer, brushing his lips against her forehead in a tender, almost hesitant kiss. It was brief, but it left a spark of warmth in her chest, a feeling of belonging that Sarah had never experienced before. As they stood together, Kale's arm wrapped protectively around her, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. She didn't know what the future held, but in this moment, standing beside Kale, she knew that no matter what came their way, they would face it together. The days that followed were a blur of new beginnings and overwhelming emotions for Sarah. She found herself living in a world that, until recently, seemed far beyond her reach. Kale had kept his promise, she was safe, and she was no longer invisible. But as she settled into the rhythm of life at his side, doubts still lingered in her mind. Despite the warmth she felt in his presence, she couldn't help but question her place in this new world. Was she truly deserving of the life Kale offered her? The castle, the luxury, the attention. It all felt like a dream that could shatter at any moment. One evening, as the sun set over the kingdom, Sarah stood by the large balcony in Kale's chambers, her thoughts drifting. The sky was painted in hues of pink and orange, the fading light casting a soft glow over the lands below. She sighed softly, her fingers tracing the cool stone railing as she watched the vast expanse of the Pax territory. Kale's footsteps echoed behind her, and without turning around, Sarah spoke. Do you ever think about your past? She asked, her voice soft but tinged with uncertainty. Kale paused, his presence drawing nearer. For a moment, he didn't speak, and Sarah wondered if she had crossed a line. But then, he spoke, his voice surprisingly gentle. Sometimes, he said, his tone distant, as if he were recalling something long buried. But the past doesn't define me anymore. It's the future that matters now. And you are part of that future, Sarah. Sarah's heart fluttered at his words, but a part of her still hesitated. I'm not like the others, she whispered, more to herself than to him. I've never been chosen. I've always been overlooked. Kale moved closer, standing beside her, his presence a steady force beside her. That's why I chose you, he said, his voice firm. Not because you are like the others, but because you are you. You have a strength in you that no one else can match. You see the world with kindness, and that's something rare. Don't ever doubt that. Sarah turned to face him, her eyes searching his for reassurance. The way he spoke, so sure of himself, made her feel both comforted and uncertain at the same time. But what if I'm not strong enough? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Kale reached out, cupping her face gently in his hands. You are stronger than you know, he said, his eyes locking with hers. And I will always be here to remind you of that. We'll face everything together, Sarah. You're never alone. She felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, allowing herself to feel the weight of his words. She had never allowed herself to be vulnerable before, never believed that someone could care for her the way Kale did. But here, in this moment, surrounded by his warmth and his unwavering belief in her, she allowed herself to hope. I trust you, she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. And I'll do my best to be the Luna you deserve. Kale's eyes softened, and he leaned down to kiss her forehead, a gesture that filled her with a sense of peace she had never known. You are more than enough, Sarah, he said, his voice low and reassuring. You always have been. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the truth of his words settle deep within her. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen, not just for what others expected her to be, but for who she was. And as she stood there, in the quiet embrace of Kale's love and protection, she knew that this was just the beginning of their journey together. Days passed, and Sarah found herself slowly adjusting to her new life beside Kale, the Alpha King. The weight of her past seemed to lessen with each passing moment as she discovered the world Kale had promised her. The grandeur of the castle, the powerful wolves that roamed its halls, and the quiet moments shared with Kale, all of it was beginning to feel like a dream. But even in this new reality, there were moments of doubt. Sarah still couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong. No matter how many times Kale reassured her, her insecurities crept in, threatening to tear apart the peace she had finally begun to find. It was one afternoon, as the sun bathed the palace in its golden light, that Sarah found herself standing by the window. Once again, gazing out over the lands. She had spent so many years feeling like an outsider, an invisible Omega. And now, with Kale by her side, everything was different. But the question still lingered, was she truly worthy of this life? You're lost in thought again, Kale's voice broke through her musings, warm and familiar. Sarah turned to find him standing at the door, his silver eyes soft with concern. He was dressed in his usual regal attire, his presence commanding, yet the way he looked at her made her feel as though she was the most important person in the room. I didn't mean to disturb you, Sarah said softly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. I still can't believe this is real. I'm here, with you, in your world. It's so much more than I ever imagined. Kale crossed the room in a few strides, his presence filling the space. He gently cupped her face in his hands, his touch reassuring, grounding. You don't have to be anything other than yourself, Sarah, he said, his voice low and steady. You are more than enough. This life, this place, it's yours as much as it is mine. Sarah closed her eyes at his words, allowing herself to feel the truth of them, even if a small part of her still hesitated to believe it. She had spent so long in the shadows, too afraid to hope for something better. But now, with Kale's unwavering support, she was learning to let go of that fear. I don't know if I'll ever be as strong as you, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. I've spent my whole life feeling weak, like I'm not enough. Kale's thumb brushed gently across her cheek, and he leaned down to kiss her forehead. You don't have to be like me, Sarah, he said softly. You're strong in your own way, in ways I could never be. You have a heart that sees the world differently, a heart that can heal and protect. That's what makes you special. His words filled Sarah with a warmth she couldn't explain, a warmth that spread through her like sunlight. For the first time in her life, she truly believed that she was worthy not because of her strength or her ability to fit into someone else's idea of power, but because of who she was at her core. She was worthy because she was Sarah Whitlock, the Omega who had been discarded, who had been overlooked, but who now stood by the side of the Alpha King. And that was enough. Thank you, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Kale smiled, his eyes softening with affection. You never have to thank me, he said, his voice filled with quiet certainty. You're mine now, Sarah. And I'll always be here to remind you of how much you mean to me. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over her. The doubts that had plagued her for so long began to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence. For the first time in her life, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. With Kale by her side, there was no challenge they couldn't face together. And as the evening sky grew darker, Sarah knew that this was only the beginning of their journey, a journey where love, trust, and the strength they shared would carry them through whatever the future held. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah grew more accustomed to her new life beside Kale. The castle, once a daunting place full of strangers, now felt like home. The other wolves in the pack no longer looked at her with disdain. They looked at her with respect, as the Luna, the chosen mate of the Alpha King. The transition was not always easy. There were moments when Sarah still felt the weight of her past, the years spent in isolation, the times when she had been discarded, ignored, and forgotten. But each day, Kale reminded her that she was no longer that forgotten Omega. She was his Luna, and with that came a responsibility she never imagined she would carry. Kale, despite his position and the responsibilities that came with being the Alpha King, never once made her feel small. He treated her as an equal, not just in title, but in everything they did. He sought her opinion, listened to her thoughts, and made her feel like she was truly part of his world. Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as she walked through the halls of the castle, her hand in Kale's, knowing that this place, this world, was hers as much as it was his. But the reality of their life together was not without its challenges. As the Luna, Sarah was expected to fulfill certain duties. She had to learn the ways of the pack, how to lead with compassion and strength, and how to work alongside Kale to ensure the well-being of their people. It was a heavy burden, but one she was beginning to embrace. One afternoon, after a long day of meetings and discussions with the pack leaders, Sarah found herself standing in the garden, the cool breeze brushing against her face. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, and allowed the tranquility of the moment to wash over her. She had learned to find peace in these quiet moments, away from the duties and expectations. "I see you found your spot," Kale's voice came from behind her, warm and comforting. Sarah turned to face him, her heart fluttering at the sight of him. His presence always seemed to calm her, to make her feel grounded, no matter how chaotic the world around them became. "It's peaceful here," she replied softly, her gaze meeting his. Kale walked over to her, his eyes softening as he took in the serenity of the garden. "I've always found peace in this place," he said, his voice carrying a hint of nostalgia. "It was my mother's favorite spot. She used to bring me here when I was a boy. She'd say that no matter how stormy the world outside, there was always a place of calm within these walls." Sarah felt a pang in her chest as she listened to him, realizing how much Kale had endured, how much weight he carried, both as the Alpha King and as a man who had lost so much. "Do you miss her?" Sarah asked gently. Kale's gaze darkened slightly, but he nodded. "Every day," he admitted, his voice low. "But I carry her memory with me. And I know she would be proud of what we're building together." His words filled Sarah with a deep sense of warmth. She had always felt like she was struggling to find her place, but in this moment, with Kale beside her, she realized that she was not alone. They were building something together, a future where she wasn't just the discarded Omega, but the woman who stood beside him as his equal. The thought gave her strength, and she smiled up at Kale, feeling the weight of her insecurities slowly lifting. "We're in this together," she said quietly, her voice filled with certainty. Kale's eyes softened as he reached out to take her hand. "Always," he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. As they stood together in the garden, Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over her. This life, this future, was hers. And with Kale by her side, she knew they could face anything that came their way. The days seemed to blend together as Sarah settled more into her life alongside Kale. The castle, with all its grandeur and tradition, no longer felt like a foreign world. It was hers now, as much as it was Kale's. The wolves that once looked at her with judgment and disdain now saw her as their Luna, and with that, came the weight of responsibility. But Kale was always by her side, offering his unwavering support and love. It was in these quiet moments, like the one they shared in the garden, that Sarah felt the truth of her place in the world. But despite all the progress, there were still challenges that weighed on her heart. One evening, after a particularly long day of pack matters, Sarah found herself standing alone by the window in her chambers. The moonlight cast soft shadows across the room, and as she gazed out at the kingdom below, a sense of longing washed over her. She had everything she ever dreamed of, yet there was a small part of her that still felt uncertain. She wasn't sure why it bothered her. Kale had been nothing but kind, gentle, and loving. But there was something deep inside her that whispered, "What if I'm not enough?" She had spent so many years feeling invisible, discarded, and now that she was in a position of power, it felt almost too good to be true. A soft knock at the door broke her thoughts. "Sarah?" Kale's voice was warm and familiar, and it immediately brought her a sense of comfort. She turned to face him, trying to push away the lingering doubt in her chest. "I'm here," she said, her voice softer than usual. Kale stepped inside, his eyes searching her face. "I thought I'd find you here," he said, walking over to her. "What's on your mind?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, her gaze falling to the floor. Don't know, she said quietly. I feel like everything is perfect, but then I start wondering if I'm really enough for this life. For you. Kale's heart clenched as he listened to her words. He crossed the room, his hand gently lifting her chin so that she would look at him. Sarah, he said softly, his voice full of affection, you are more than enough. I chose you, not because you fit some mold or because you were the perfect Omega. I chose you because of who you are. You have a strength in your heart that no one can see but me. I see it in the way you care for our people, in the way you've embraced this life, and in the love you've shown me. You're my Luna because I want you to be, because you've always been enough for me. His words sank deep into her heart, melting the walls of doubt that had built up. She felt the truth of them. Kale truly believed in her. And that belief gave her the strength to believe in herself. Sarah smiled softly, the weight on her shoulders lifting for the first time in days. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Kale cupped her face in his hands, his eyes never leaving hers. I will always be here for you, Sarah. You never have to doubt that. Sarah nodded, her heart full, her love for him growing stronger with every passing moment. I know, she said quietly, her voice steady now. And I'll always be here for you, Kale. Together, we'll face whatever comes. Kale smiled, a warmth in his gaze that made Sarah's heart flutter. He leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. I'm proud of you, he murmured, his voice full of sincerity. You're already doing more than I ever could have asked for. You've shown me that we're not just a king and his Luna. We're partners. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the depth of his words. In that moment, she knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. They were no longer just two individuals thrown together by fate, they were a team, bound by love, respect, and an unbreakable bond. As Kale wrapped his arms around her, Sarah knew that her place in this world, in his world, was exactly where it was meant to be. The days passed peacefully, and Sarah continued to grow into her role as Luna. Kale, always by her side, guided her through the complexities of leadership. Yet, there were moments, fleeting and rare, when doubt would creep in. In those moments, Sarah would find herself returning to the quiet corners of the castle, her thoughts wandering to the life she had left behind. She had never expected to be here, in this place, beside him, and sometimes the enormity of it all made her heart race. But Kale's presence, his unwavering support, had become her anchor, keeping her grounded. One evening, as they sat together in the grand hall, Kale turned to her, his expression serious but warm. We're about to face something that could change everything, he said, his voice low and measured. Sarah met his gaze, her brow furrowing with concern. What do you mean? She asked, her voice steady despite the unease that stirred within her. Kale hesitated for a moment, then continued. There's a threat to the pack. Someone within the inner circle has been trying to undermine our leadership. I've kept it quiet for now, but it's time we address it. Sarah's heart quickened, but she stayed silent, letting him explain. I don't want to drag you into this, Kale said, his voice softening. But you need to know. We're stronger together, and I trust you more than anyone else. His words sent a wave of warmth through her chest, but a knot of worry remained. What should we do? Sarah asked, her voice firm. Kale stood up and extended his hand to her. We face it, together, he said. I'll never keep anything from you again. You're my Luna, Sarah. You're part of this just as much as I am. His words filled her with a sense of purpose, and for the first time, Sarah didn't feel overwhelmed by the responsibility. With Kale by her side, she felt ready to face whatever challenge came their way. Over the next few days, the tension in the castle grew palpable. Sarah spent more time with Kale, working alongside him to uncover the traitor within their ranks. The trust between them had only deepened, and she had never felt more certain of her place by his side. The moment of truth came sooner than expected. Sarah and Kale were standing in the great hall, surrounded by trusted pack members, when the traitor's identity was revealed. The room was still as Kale's voice rang out, commanding the attention of everyone present. It's over, Kale said, his gaze sweeping over the room. The one who has been plotting against us is right here. Sarah stood beside him, her heart steady as she looked at the faces in the crowd. The betrayal was a painful blow, but it was a reminder that no matter how strong they were, they would always have enemies. The traitor, a trusted advisor, stepped forward, their face a mask of defiance. But the room was silent, waiting for Kale's command. Sarah's gaze never left him, her hand resting gently in his. "You have two choices," Kale said, his voice commanding yet calm. "Leave the pack, or face the consequences of your actions." The advisor hesitated, the weight of Kale's words sinking in. Finally, they bowed their head and left the room, the tension in the air lifting. The pack was safe, but the moment felt bittersweet. "You did well," Sarah said quietly, looking up at Kale. "We did well," he replied, his voice soft as he pulled her close. "Together, we're unstoppable." In that moment, Sarah realized how far they had come. She had gone from being an invisible Omega, cast aside by her pack, to standing beside the Alpha King, her equal in every way. And as they stood there, the future before them, Sarah knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, their bond stronger than ever. The weeks that followed the traitor's exposure were a time of change for Sarah and Kale. The pack was unified once again, stronger and more loyal than ever. The bond between Sarah and Kale had deepened, their partnership becoming the foundation upon which they built their future. The air in the castle felt lighter, as if the weight of the past had finally been lifted. Sarah had become not just a figurehead as Luna, but an active force within the pack. She worked alongside Kale, learning the intricacies of leadership, and helping to guide the pack with wisdom and compassion. The other wolves began to look to her for guidance, and Sarah found herself growing into a role she had never imagined for herself. One evening, as Sarah and Kale walked through the gardens of the castle, the soft moonlight casting shadows. On the ground, Kale stopped and turned to her. "Sarah," he said, his voice low but filled with a quiet intensity. "There's something I need to tell you." Sarah looked up at him, her heart skipping a beat at the seriousness in his tone. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady but with a touch of curiosity. Kale took a deep breath, his silver eyes reflecting the light of the moon as he gazed at her. "I've made a decision," he said slowly. "One that affects not just us, but the entire pack." Sarah's brow furrowed as she waited for him to continue. "What is it?" she repeated. Kale's hand found hers, his grip firm and comforting. "I'm going to step down as Alpha King," he said, his words taking Sarah by surprise. She blinked, not quite understanding at first. "What do you mean?" she asked, her heart racing. "You're the Alpha King," she whispered, as if the very title held the weight of the world. Kale nodded, his expression calm, but there was a depth to his gaze that spoke of a decision made after much thought. "I've spent my life focused on ruling, on leading with power," he said quietly. "But I've realized something. The true strength of a leader lies not in the power they hold, but in the people they serve. And it's not just the pack that I want to serve. It's you. Together, we will lead. Not as separate rulers, but as partners, as equals." Sarah's heart swelled at his words, and for the first time, she truly understood the depth of Kale's love and commitment to her. She had never imagined him stepping down from his position, but now that he had said it, she felt a sense of peace. It wasn't about power or titles. It was about the bond they shared, the trust they had in each other. "You don't have to do this," Sarah said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "We can lead together, as we always have." Kale smiled, the warmth in his eyes filling her with reassurance. "That's the thing, Sarah," he said gently. "We've always led together. But now, it's official. I want us to rule as equals, as partners, in every sense of the word." Sarah nodded, her heart full as she looked at Kale. In that moment, she knew that they were truly unstoppable. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, and they would do so with strength, love, and unwavering support for one another. The future was theirs to shape, and as long as they had each other, nothing could stand in their way.